Oh, that's serious.
What? All right, so there are a lot of more people going to show up. We're going to get started. We're past the 7 o'clock hour, and just so you know, Grady and Beth, we can go over an hour. It's not a big deal. We're here to serve you guys, and hopefully Adrienne will show up at some point. Hello and welcome to Exile and Bookbill's Authors on Tap reading series. I am Javier Ramirez, and along with Kristen Gilbert, run Exile out of the Fine Arts Building at 410 South Michigan Avenue, Suite 210. Tonight, we're going to put behind us the horror that was Lollapalooza last week, which was right across the street, right over there. You wouldn't know it, like it never happened. And turn to the fictionalized sort that we love. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to host Grady Hendrix, who is going to be in conversation with Beth Golay, and hopefully Adrienne King will show up. She's having some difficulties over in Oregon, and hope she's okay. Of course, Grady is the author of some of the best horror writing out there these days, including the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I always forget to do this. Horror Store, which we have here. We Sold Our Souls, and My Best Friend's Exorcism, which we sold out of. Tonight, Grady will discuss his new and incredibly addictive novel, Final Girl Support Group. And Grady's fantastic all around, but he sent these really incredible signed book plates, which you will get if you purchase a book from here at Exile and Bookville. He wrote a few different ones, but this is our favorite. He will be in discussion with Beth Golay, who is an incredible part of our team, but she also she works for an affiliate in Wichita, Kansas for NPR, and she does this professionally. So I'm going to step away and let them talk. And hopefully, like I said, Adrienne will join us at some point. Keep your cameras on, keep yourselves muted. But as Grady said, feel free to raise your hand or write something in the chat, a question in the chat, and he'll be happy to answer them as the event progresses. You can buy copies of Grady's books through exileandbookville.com. We have a brand new fancy e-commerce site, which really helps you guys. It makes it easy for you guys to order books from us way better than it was before. So I'm going to stop talking, get out of the way, let you guys get to it. You have a lot to talk about. Have a great show, guys, and thank you so much. And hopefully Adrienne will show up at some point.
Yeah.
Take it away.
So thanks. So Beth, not to do a typical guy thing and not let you speak right off the bat, but I was going to say, so Adrienne really wants to be here. She lives in Oregon, where she works with a winery. And actually, I am drinking her Crystal Lake. This is her summer white blend right now. She also does the paintings on the label. They've had heavy thunderstorms, and apparently the sky hates Oregon. And they've had something like 28 or something lightning strikes in their area in the last 24 hours, and it really messes with her internet. We lost her for about 15 minutes on Monday's event, and she's doing her best to get in here now, but it's just, they're in the country, gets dark in the country, lightning, sky hates you. So anyways, she's trying her best. So I'm sure the numbers of participants just dropped to like 5, but the 5 of us will soldier on.
And the minute she arrives, I will duck out immediately.
So wait, Beth, I got to ask you the first question. Like, are you a slasher fan?
Well, you know this from our conversation before. I asked you, what should I, that I have to run to the kitchen to hide.
I know.
I need an exit strategy. So I am a Grady Hendrix fan. So does that count?
Sure, why not? I'll take a compliment wherever I can get it. So do you want to let's jump right in?
I just want to ask some questions because I have read the book and we have had a conversation before. So, and apologies to all of your fans who might know all of this already, but so the Final Girl Support Group.
Cool.
The Final Girl.
Oh, yep. So I think at this point it's sort of saturated the pop culture consciousness. A final girl is just a woman who survives a horror movie. She's the one who makes it to the end. Adrienne played the final girl in the first Friday the 13th movie as Alice Hardy. famously, Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson in Nightmare on Elm Street. Jamie Lee Curtis was Laurie Strode in Halloween. Marilyn Burns, I think she was also named Alice, I'm pretty sure, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so that's really who it is. And, you know, I have a connection to Adrienne that goes back 40, Sally, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Joshua, in the chat, correcting me on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I appreciate. And Texas Chainsaw is one of those movies that, like, I saw it once as a kid, and it was back in the day of VHS when, like, you'd rent it from the store and you'd get the clear clamshell. And, you know, you didn't even get the cover art with it. And the tape they had was a dupe. So they'd written Texas Chainsaw on it in magic marker. And we were used to seeing, like, Nightmare on Elm Street and Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers and Evil Dead 2. And, you know, horror movies were fun for us. And we put that in. It's no actors we've ever heard of. We hadn't heard of Tobe Hooper. Like, it was like watching a snuff film. We were just like, who are these crazy people? What is going on here? And it's a remarkably non-gory movie. And yet somehow it just has such an unsavory, unhealthy atmosphere. We were traumatized, and I've only seen it one time since then. And I think it's a great movie. Like, objectively, it's a great movie. But for me, it's sort of over with Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is a movie that you can't really argue over. It is a truly great motion picture. It's just not a movie I ever want to see again.
Well, and I'm trying to think of movies I never want to see again, but I saw as a child. And I don't know that these would be considered slashers, because I remember Children of the Corn and He Wants You
Yeah.
Too, Malachi, and that scares me to death. But you know, in addition to being a writer and a journalist, you're a founder of the New York Asian Film Festival and a former film critic. And you know, you have these two mediums, print and film. And I want to know about how you approach them, because you write books and you review films, but you also
Sure.
adapt to screen.
Yeah, so one thing that drives me nuts, and it's actually one thing that's made doing events for Final Girl Support Group more fun, is I hate when a discussion starts out about horror books and it quickly turns into movies, because at the end of the day, we've all seen more movies than we've read books, right? Like, I mean, like, a movie's 90 minutes or 2 hours. A book, it's a lot of words. And trust me, I know how many words. I write them. And so, like, it's a lot. But this is one book I did where I really like that the conversation skips back and forth, because the book was really written about my sort of trying to be like, I've watched horror movies for like 40 years of my life. And that means I've been watching people, mostly women, get murdered for fun for a very long time. And what does that mean? And so all my books have like a question in them that I'm trying to answer. It's a very long-winded and inefficient way to answer questions. Like, I could just think hard and maybe jot some things in a journal, but I choose to write a book. Most people who read my books don't even know what the question is with the book. But for me, it's really like, that's what gets me through. And that was it for this. In terms of writing books and movies, writing movies has made me a much better book writer. Writing books has had zero or perhaps a negative impact on my ability to write a movie. Movies are all external. Books are all internal. Like, even a book that's in third person, you're in someone's head, you're in someone's point of view, you are inside someone. It's creepy. A movie, it's all external. If you can't show it in action, it doesn't exist. I'm doing the screenplay right now for the feature film of Horror Store, my book about a haunted IKEA. And I was having a really hard time with it. And then I remembered that the climax, or the turning point in the book is when the main character, Amy, gets sort of trapped in this chair, and she sort of confronts the futility of her life. And it's really awful. And then later she decides to keep going anyways. And there is nothing more boring than showing someone on screen deciding something, someone making a decision. It doesn't exist. You can show them doing something. You can show them scratching their head or flashing on images. You can't show someone making a decision. It's just dumb. It doesn't work. So when I figured that out, I solved a lot of problems. And I hate whoever wrote that book, because they did some bad writing. But yeah, so that's the big difference. And for me, knowing how to maximize screen time and stuff, and to treat my characters like actors. Like, they need a good entrance. They need good, if they're not doing something in a scene, why are they there? An actor will be like, why am I here? What's my, like, can I just go be craft services right now? So I want to make sure they're doing something. And if you've read more than one of my books, you may notice that, like, when I wrote Horror Store, I've got scenes where characters are just sitting in a car thinking. That makes no sense. Like literally in a parking lot, sitting in a car thinking. By the time you get to Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires or Final Girl Support Group, if someone's in a car, they're in it with someone else that they're talking to, and the place they're going is either a place they really need to get to right now, or they really don't want to be there. Like, what is the point of this meaningless transition? You know, just skip to the good parts. Elmore Leonard famously said his piece of writing advice was leave out the parts that readers skip. And I feel like that's like something I try to do. I may not always get it right, but I try.
Well, and you might have to refresh my memory, but I think we meet Lynette Tarkington at the beginning, but we meet all of the women very early on at this final girl support group, all, you know, backs to the wall, nobody's backs to the door, and they're the C formation. So talk to me about this group and why they're coming together.
Yeah, well, interestingly, that scene of Lynette in her apartment by herself before she goes to group and we get everyone was actually not there. And I had my manager and my agent both being like, you can't start with that scene. It's like, you know, 7 characters. They've got all this history. You're just dropping people. You're taking readers and sticking their face in a blender. And I was like, yeah, punk rock. That's what I want to do to readers. And then they were like, would you do that to your mother? And I was like, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I'll ease up on the throttle a little and slide people into this pool of molten lead. And they made a good point. Like, I talk really fast. I probably talk too fast. And I realize that I need to, when I'm doing events, like slow that down because I just lose people. And if I had started the book that way with that faster chapter 2, I would have just lost everyone. And so that scene where everyone's in group, it was tough because they've been in group therapy for like 16 years. And I don't know if anyone here has ever done group therapy. I've done it a few times, and like a year in group therapy is like 7 years in real life. They're like dog years. A lot happens. And you develop really intense likes and dislikes that can change from week to week. So like these women have been in group therapy 7 times 16. I don't know what that is. It's a big number. It's over 70. I know that much. And I wanted each of these women to have dealt with this in a different way. Because as a kid, who had awkward social skills, I spent a lot of time imagining what I would do if I was in a horror movie because it seemed better than showing up in like Algebra 2. And so I always thought if I was a final girl, I'd be Lynette, I'd be weaponized, I'd have locks on my doors, I'd know self-defense, you know, going outdoors, I'd know like, you know, watch out for those vans and all this stuff. And then as I became an adult boy, I realized that like Lynette, all my plans would just fall apart the second they met reality. Like the second they're outside my head and in reality, I'm screwed. I'm toast. Like it's just not going to happen. You know, I've been in fights before, and you always imagine that in a fight, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and like I discovered that my strategy in a fight was just to sit there and take it because I have a pretty high pain tolerance, and so just like, okay. Fine. Tell me when you're tired. But the other final girls, you know, with them, you know, some of them are in denial. Adrienne, I used Adrienne King's name for, she sort of used her trauma and what's happened to her to help other people. I mean, she's sort of like an Elizabeth Smart, right? This horrible thing happens to you and you use it as a platform to reach out to other people. Heather, I mean, she's sort of the Nightmare on Elm Street dream killer, although that was sort of my anti-Neil Gaiman moment with that. Not that I have a problem with Neil Gaiman, but I feel like in terms of pop culture and dreams, you've got Freddy Krueger over here and Neil Gaiman's Sandman over here. And I'm like, why can't we just cross those over? And because there is something sort of homicidal about Neil Gaiman's Sandman. Like, I don't know, he's sort of goth and emo, and he's probably really cold and has like really cold feet. Like they keep introducing you to his girlfriends. And I'm like, who wants to be in bed with this guy? He looks clammy. But so, not Neil Gaiman, the Sandman, fictional character. And then Heather, so the dream one, she's someone who I was thinking about it. And I was like, well, if you had someone trying to kill you in your dreams, no one would believe you. like literally no one, even if people believed you, they'd eventually stop believing you when like sort of your moment in the spotlight passed. So A, I'd be self-medicating like a mofo just to deal with the fact that when I went to sleep, I was in danger, like someone's in your head, that's disgusting. And B, the fact that everyone like, you know, really like thinks you're a liar would be, so Heather's, you know, got that substance problem. Marilyn's just in pure straight up denial, but she's also constructed this armor made of money around her. They each sort of do their own thing, and they're all ways. I just try to think my way through what would this be like if it was real. So yeah, and then those scenes were so much fun to write. I love writing scenes where lots of people are talking. You know, it's, and I really love writing dialogue so much. I don't know, there's nothing I like better than talking to people. And so as you can tell, the monologue is like my preferred mode of communication.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was that scene. And you know, one thing that always bummed me out about Final Girl Support Group, and I consider a personal failure, is there's only one scene of group therapy. Like I wanted more.
Yeah.
And there's a draft of the book where there are flashbacks to other group sessions, but no one wants a flashback. People, you know, and I wanted the book to mirror a slasher movie, which is just the best part of the slasher is the chase at the end, that like last 20 to 40 minutes. And so I wanted to be a big chase from A to B. There we go, breathless, done, no flashbacks.
Well, you know, talking about Heather DeLuca, I received, and I received early copies of the book, so I'm not sure if anybody else has access to this, so I apologize in advance, sorry. But I received a couple of packs of the Final Girl Support
Oh
Group
yeah.
trading cards, and I didn't look at it until after I was done reading them because I didn't want to spoil anything for myself. But there are all of these, well, there's Adrienne
Yeah.
right there, Adrienne Butler, and
Fine.
Fine.
That little plant, people love that plant. There was a draft of the book where Fine spoke and had dialogue, and everyone who was reading it was like, this is too weird, man. Like, just make it inside Lynette's head. And I was like, fine.
Well, and I especially loved Heather DeLuca's strengths and weaknesses. Her strengths were alcohol and drugs, and her weaknesses were alcohol and drugs. So I love that you were talking about her. But back to the book, maybe you could talk to me about the asides, you know, the interspersed articles throughout, because many of my book darts that are in my book seem to land in those sections. Probably because they took a deeper dive into the subject of mass killings and maybe gave the book more weight. And one example is an article by David Thomas titled "Slasher Movies in an Age of Mass Shootings," talking about the weapons of choice are important because we need to believe death has meanings. And this quote, "The real violence of a child entering a school cafeteria and spraying bullets at random is too cruel." So talk to me about these interstitial nuggets.
Yeah, and actually, so that's sort of going to lead me in three different directions that I'm going to cover in order. So the first one is the interstitials. Is I just think if someone's buying a book, like, I mean, I have no problem like with digital books or audiobooks or anything. Like, if it, you know, 30% of my book sales are ebooks. So I love that. But I feel like if someone's going to go through the trouble of buying a physical object that they have in their house, and as you could tell in my office, like I've just got like too much of these things, like they're everywhere. And so I feel like if someone's going to go through that trouble, I want the book they buy to have everything full. I want it to be, you know, brimming over. Like I've picked up books where like there's like 4 blank pages in the back, and I'm like, come on, do better. Like, come on, get it together. Who wants to buy blank? I've got a shelf, probably a whole shelf over there full of blank pages if you put them all together. What a waste. So I've learned enough about book production after doing this a few times to know that if an editor can like jostle, because books are ultimately a page that gets folded 4 times and cut. So it's if you just jostle a little that way or jostle a little that way, they can free up a page, like a 2 blank pages pretty much, or 1 or 2 blank between every chapter. And so I'm like, well, why not have something there? And I overwrite just like I overtalk and overdrink. And so I feel like, you know, every book I write, I've got tons of ancillary material, probably 50% of the interstitials from Final Girl Support Group were stuff I'd already written, stuff the characters written, I just want to get in their head, something from an earlier draft, something I wrote just to get into character with something, which makes me seem really like I work hard. I feel very lazy all the time, but I think that's just it's inferiority complex or something. I don't know. Anyways, and then that left me 50% of it to fill. And so I just started filling it with stuff from the characters because, you know, I want readers to be really immersed in this. I want them to get their money's worth. And actually the first time I did it, I used real people. Like it was like articles by, they weren't, I made up the articles, but it was like Kim Newman and Mike Gingold, who used to write for Fangoria for years and years, and Maitland McDonough and Andrea Dworkin and all this stuff. And my editor was like, hard no. You cannot fabricate something that someone wrote and say they wrote it. And I'm like, why not? What are they? I was like, because first off, I can get permission from a lot of these people, probably not Andrea Dworkin because she's dead, but she's dead. So that takes care of Andrea Dworkin. And then, and I actually like Andrea Dworkin's writing. But she was just like, no. So I had to make up imaginary people and do this. But the other thing is, and this leads into the third thing as well, the quote you're talking about, one of the things I really wanted to look at here is, you know, these days, everyone, what we all think of slasher movies as fun and cozy. I do too. Little nostalgia nuggets from the 80s, and they're comforting. But really, a slasher movie is the template for the modern day horror story we live pretty much once or twice a week in America, which is an armed man enters a supposedly safe space like a school or a office building or a church or a dorm, and methodically kills everyone he sees. And that's what we live with. And that's the slasher movie template. And so I was like, well, what makes them different? And was really thinking about that. And one of the things I wanted to do was bring that into collision with a slasher. These women who survived people trying to kill them with boat hooks and harpoons and spear guns and corkscrews and bike chains and machetes. And then it's just an AR-15. And just what that sort of like, I don't know, that sort of like sobering element of it, that kind of throwing a bucket of cold water on the genre. And one of the things that sort of led me to is this idea that, you know, in Halloween, Dr. Loomis Donner Pleasance is like, you know, he is Michael, I love him because he's always like bursting in and going, no, he is evil. Like people are like performing dentistry work and no. But so I love Dr. Loomis, but he's like a terrible therapist, right? He's like, he has this patient for 15 years and he's like, he's just evil. I'm like, you know, that when I was watching that once in university, I had this moment where it's like, is that what my therapist says about me? Like, he's just evil. Or like with me, he's just annoying. There's no look into the eyes of pure annoying. But with Michael, and I was like, that's terrible. But later in the movie, Jamie Lee Curtis, someone asked what happened or what he was, and she says he was the boogeyman. And I realized that a friend of mine is a book agent, mostly for children's books. And she was selling a book that took place, a picture book for kids that took place during an active shooter drill. And the author wrote it and illustrated it because one night her daughter woke her up. Her daughter's like 6 and was like, Mom, there's a man in the house with a gun. And she started to ask other parents, and other parents like, oh my God, yeah, my kids had a nightmare or this. And they realized that the boogeyman today for this generation of kids coming up is a man in the house with a gun, a man in the school with a gun. And so that's something I just want to, I don't know, there's no answer there. There's no wisdom, but I just wanted to sort of have that out there as a loose thread in this book, to let people sort of sit with a little, because I don't know what it means, but I'm better at asking questions than answering them. But I felt like that's just part of the picture, and I'm not even sure I'm not sure if it's an edge piece or a centerpiece, but it's some part of this jigsaw puzzle that we have about how we relate to murder as entertainment.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you posed this question out there, and it was very sobering. And just this morning, I interviewed Maggie Smith for her collection Goldenrod, and two of her poems. One talked about, well, why don't we just leave the flags at half mast? And one had to do with her daughter asking, well, why would somebody kidnap a kid? Why would somebody kill a kid? So it was a very sobering aspect of your book. And I think it was necessary, honestly, because, you know, another one of these asides starts, all our monsters are the same monster, a male monster. And in this article of the story of the Minotaur, it's compared to a specific story of mass murder at a camp. Youths sent to a faraway place where they cannot escape, stalked and murdered by a monster in a ritual sacrifice. And I'm a sucker for a Minotaur collection. I think I've told you this before. And then the article goes on to say, it's the oldest and only story, an attempt to imitate two divine acts of God, creation and destruction, birth and death. Women get birth, so men must settle for death, and they become experts in the subject. You know, you wrote these asides, so talk to me about what you were talking about there.
Yeah, well, it's a little emo, I will admit. Like, it's a little bit high school poetry journal, but it is something. Chrissy, who's the secret final girl in the book, so sorry, a spoiler if you haven't read it, but why are you here if you didn't read it? You know, it's she really believes this stuff, and you do. So, okay, this is going to be a little long-winded. Oh my God, everyone's like, this hasn't been long-winded. But I really think everything comes from somewhere. Like there's no such thing as in 1971, people started to write books about demonic possession. No, there was a first one. There was one someone did first. And I really, really believe that. And so tracing these sort of slasher tropes back, you wind up getting into fairy tales. You get into Little Red Riding Hood territory, right? She's going to her grandmother's house in the woods and a wolf. Like, it's not a story without the wolf. It's just going to grandma's house. And you get into Bluebeard, don't look behind this one door. And it's the one door she looks behind and finds all his dead wives. And you're kind of like, does he say that to all his wives? Like, don't look, like, what about the first one? Before there was anything behind that door she couldn't look at, he just killed her. Like, she didn't break a warning or anything. He was just like, you're murdered. Happy honeymoon, you're dead. And then he put her behind the door. For the second wife, he's like, don't look behind that door or I'll kill you. So then he had some justification. But you can even go beyond the fairy tales and you get all the way back to mythology. Like Norse mythology, the world is created out of the original god's corpse that his children murdered, and humanity are just maggots in that corpse, and his ribs form the vault of the sky. Greek myths, I mean, you know, it's all about killing and eating your children, you know, Zeus killing Kronos and all this and castrating them too, just while they're at it. There's so many foundational myths that our world starts with a murder. And it's really weird. I mean, we're like a necro species, like in our heads, like, because really the world started with, you know, single-celled animals and organisms, and then we sort of built up, and then we got onto land and evolution. But like in mythology, it's like, no, this giant killed his dad, and then the blood became the oceans, and we live on his giant dead head. And it's like, Jesus Christ. Like, it's like we live in our heads, we live in a very messed up world. But one thing I did want to say is, because I just took the trouble to do this, is so I was really, really fascinated by where slashers come from. And so you sort of go back, right? And there was the golden age of slashers from like 78 to 84, when there were like 150 of these. So the Microwave Massacre, the Toolbox Massacre, the Icebox Massacre, you know, all these movies. And you even go before that, and the first one of that wave was Halloween in 78. And I'm not a big fan of Halloween. I feel like if there's a franchise out there where the producer was like, I don't want any jokes, no jokes, everything's grim, it's Halloween. But that first Halloween movie, and I love 3. I mean, I like 4 a lot too. I'm a big Danielle Harris fan, and I like H2O. But that first Halloween movie is pretty perfect in the way John Carpenter takes a lot of pre-existing things and sort of weaponizes them in this one package that really, really works. But before Halloween, There's 1974's Black Christmas, directed by Bob Clark, who directed later Porky's and A Christmas Story. And it's sort of this proto-slasher that I still think is phenomenal. I'm married to a Canadian, so I'm a sucker for that Canadian atmosphere, but also Christmas, and also Billy is a really genuinely disturbing killer, even though you never see his face. But then before that, there's a 1971 movie called Foster's Release. And Foster's Release was a 14-minute student film made by a guy named, I think, Ted Winkless, who's going to USC Film School. And at that time, he was most famous for playing the gorilla in the Banana Splits Adventure Hour. But he made this short film. And basically the film is this guy, he's like just got out of the mental institution. He's crazy and he's drinking and he's like kicking dogs and knocking over garbage cans. Blah, 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 blah. And he hides in a house and a babysitter comes to sit the kids. She starts getting these crazy phone calls. You find out the police are like, he's inside the house. And she's like, oh my God. And she runs to get the kids and he comes from upstairs where he's been calling. He's got a knife and she hits him with the freezer and runs outside. And he runs outside, gets shot by the cops. And that 1971 film was probably definitely, even though it's a short film, it only played 2 film festivals, but one of them was the USC Student Film Festival, where it was 100% definitely seen by Winkless's classmate, John Carpenter, who would go on to make Halloween. However, that story comes from an earlier story that folklorist, this urban legend called The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, which I'm not going to go, it's basically that, the calls are coming from inside the house, that folklorists have tracked all the way back to the early 60s, late 50s. And there's sort of 3 urban legends that slasher movies come from. The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. The second one's called The Roommate, which is the short version is 2 roommates on a college campus. Most people have gone home for Christmas already. One goes out, the other stays home. The one who stays home later hears scratching at the door and these horrible noises in the hall. She locks the door. Next morning, opens the door. Her roommate's in the hall with her throat slit. Some maniac killed her. Reverse version of that is roommate who goes out, comes home. There's a note on the door saying, don't turn on the light. She goes home into the bedroom, doesn't turn on the light, doesn't want to wake up her roommate, wakes up in the morning and her roommate's dead in bed, and written in blood over the bed is, aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light? There's, I think, 31 different versions of that story. And those go back to like 57, I think is the earliest one. Oliver. But the earliest and the most important urban legend that became a slasher movie is The Hook. And The Hook came to national attention. Oh, and one thing I want to say really quickly, sorry, I buried the lead on this, just to jump back, Foster's Release, even though Foster's Release was only seen by 2 film festivals and John Carpenter, Foster's Release was also rented out almost nonstop as a educational film that was shown in home economics high school classes all over America in the 1970s. And the rental materials are great. They're like, this short film, besides the excitement value for your students, demonstrates quick thinking and crisis response that are necessary skills in a babysitter. And so, like, teenagers, 15-year-olds were seeing basically a proto-Halloween in their home economics classes all over America for like 10 years. Anyways, jump back to The Hook. So The Hook got national prominence in the Dear Abby advice column when in November 8th, 1960, when a woman named who signed off Jeanette wrote it in. And the basic story is like, it's like, Dear Abby, it's the story of The Hook, right? It's like, I hope you share this with all the teens because it really had an impact on me. So these 2 kids I know in town, they went out to a lover's lane to neck and they had the radio on and an alert came over the radio that a maniac had broken out of a nearby asylum and was at large and he had a hook for a right hand. And so they're making out and then they get really creeped out. They're like, we don't want to be out here with the maniac. So they go home and the boy gets out and goes around to open the girl's car and there's a hook in the door handle on her side. So like torn off the guy's arm. It was like, he was right there. It's like, I hope this has an impact on teens that it had on me. I'm never going to go to a lover's lane or make out again. Signed, Jeanette. And that is everything in a slasher movie. Teens in a remote location trying to have sex, a nameless, faceless killer with an unusual weapon, the hook, who goes after them. One of them or 2 of them get away with their lives and decide they're never going to have sex again. Like that is the slasher ground zero, but it's not. So the Hook stories, the earliest ones came out of LA in 1947. And that was when a guy was at large in LA called the Red Light Bandit. And the Red Light Bandit was a guy who was going to lovers' lanes and sexually assaulting and robbing young couples who were necking. And he had a red spotlight on his car that the kids would think he was a police officer. So they'd cooperate. And like he'd have a flashlight, he'd shine in their eyes. So the guy was finally caught, and LA was in a panic. This was a citywide panic. Although he didn't kill anyone, he did this enough where like the city was terrorized. And these Hook stories started to circulate. The guy was finally caught. His name was Carl Chessman, C-A-R-Y-L Chessman. And they tried him for a capital crime because they used a Lindbergh baby kidnapping law to say that because he dragged one of his victims 22 feet from the car, it was kidnapping and it counted as a capital offense. And like the guy was a sleazebag. Like I don't want to shed too many tears over Carol Chessman, but Carol Chessman was an inveterate glory hound. And he always said he didn't do it. So it's like the killer's still out there, you know, but he always said he didn't do it. He wrote 4 books that were all bestsellers while he was on death row. One of them got made into a movie in 1955 that did reasonably well for a B movie. And he was on the cover of Time magazine. And when he was executed in 1960, there was folklorologists around the country track a huge explosion of Hook stories when he was very publicly executed. So this guy is ground zero for slashers today. And then, you know, you can go beyond him to you know, Jack the Ripper fan fiction, who was sort of one of the first of these nameless, faceless killers who caught the public imagination. There was a lot of fan fiction written about Jack the Ripper. And you go, and Alfred Hitchcock made a movie based on Jack the Ripper fan fiction called The Lodger. And so you could just go back and back and back, and you wind up in fairy tales and mythology. Just, we are a culture that loves to talk about murder, mostly happening to other people.
Well, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Kasia Sweeney asked a question and it was even upvoted. And also, if anybody, you know, is out there watching, even if you don't have a question to put in the chat, you know, send us a note, say where you're watching from, because, you know, Grady, I assume you're in Brooklyn, I'm in Wichita, Javier and Kristen are in Chicago, and we're from all over, and I'd love to see where everybody's joining from. So Kasia asks, she says, something I love about the book is that your own final girl characters are all very different, both to each other and to their original movie versions, while still being recognizable riffs on Sally Hardesty, Laura Strode, Sidney Prescott, etc. How did you approach differentiating each of your final girls from their cinematic counterparts, especially in terms of race, sexuality, and class?
Okay, so the first thing I want to do, though, because I've got a short answer for this, is Heather, who actually just repeated her question, but she was the first person to ask a question, and there's no
sorry.
one. No, it's not your fault at all. It was very early, but I got to say, man, if I am ever assembling a crack fighting force, I'm only getting the first people who ask questions in Q&As, because that first person's the bravest, man, and then I'll stand behind them and they can all run out and take the bullets. No, but Heather, I wanted to say, no, it's not your fault, it's me. But I wanted to say, I know, usually I write from a woman's point of view, because I like my main character.
Should we ask the question though? Heather asked, have you ever done writing from a male point of view? Okay.
Yeah.
Now
so usually I do a woman, because I want my characters to be different from me. And if they're a guy, that's just me. But I actually am writing a book right now for summer of 2022 about brothers and sisters and evil puppets and cults. And it's a brother character. And I really, as I started writing them, I was like, this is so boring. Oh my God. And then I realized who he reminded me of in my own life. And it's been so much fun. And I've done just awful things to him. So it's the first sort of male POV character I've done. I actually have a movie I wrote that's sold to these Scottish guys. I don't know if y'all know, I don't know. This musical, zombie musical called Anna and the Apocalypse. But John McPhail, who directed that, is attached to direct this. But it's a non-horror thing called Prestige Animals, and it's about drug dealers who need pumas and peacocks, animals that give them a lot of credit to own, and a pair of brothers who deal them. And so that was so much fun to do. And They're trying to raise the money for it now. I mean, they have most of it, but they're trying to get casting. It's complicated, but I really hope it comes out. But that's Guys. But anyways, so the question that was actually asked about differentiating the final girls and sort of all of them being different, one of the things with this is I kept asking these questions about final girl movies, like, why hasn't there ever been a Black final girl? And like, there's been movies with final girl adjacent characters who are Black, like in urban legend, but like, there isn't a Black final girl. And I'm like, or I mean, I guess you can look at something like Sugar Hill, but she's not really a final girl. But I was like, this is dumb. There must be a Black final girl there. And then I realized, oh, right. If in my world, these are happening as real events and then they get turned into Hollywood movies, they just would have whitewashed her. You know, like, of course there's no Black final girl in movies because there are in real life and they just get whitewashed. And that's where Adrienne came from. And then with Marilyn, who's Latina and did the Texas Chainsaw kind of character, I was like, how much more interesting is that story if it's this redneck cannibal incest family who are butchers and they're going after a Latina? Like, because I mean, they've both been in Texas just as long as each other, but, and I hope this isn't a spoiler alert for anyone, white people in Texas think they own the state. So like, you know, it was like, but you know, like, you know, Texas is sort of a land grab from Mexico, and like you've got a whole Hispanic or Latin population that's been there as long as you have, if not longer. So like, who owns what? And I thought that would be a really interesting place. And also, I really enjoyed having Marilyn. She was a character who automatically just, and I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, my characters are magical. They're real people. I just take dictation. But just like stuff feels more or less, course of more or less resistance with the character. And Marilyn is very Republican. She's very right wing. She doesn't even really have politics. She just has a super political husband who's a Republican. So she's like, sure, because she wants to be protected by this wall of money. And I really enjoyed having the Latina character who had sort of right-wing politics, because I feel like there's this habit white people like me have of thinking of anyone who's not white as a monolith, like all Black people are like this, all Latinx people are like this. And they're not. I know plenty of African-American people who are super radically right-wing in ways that make me blush. And I know others who are lefty liberals, and I know others who are just apolitical. Like, we're all just people, man. So, and I really enjoyed having Marilyn be a character who was sort of, you know, not someone I see a lot. It was really, really important to me that Julia be in a wheelchair, because you look at the beatings that final girls take and you're like, dude, someone's winding up with a spinal cord injury. And I really, people are like, what kind of research did you do for this movie? And I'm like, well, it's my life. I just watched too many slasher movies. But with Julia, I really wanted to get using a wheelchair right, because what I see a lot in movies and books is either a wheelchair is too important or it's not important enough. If your character uses a wheelchair, some people treat it like, oh my God, my life is over. I'm trapped in this chair and I'm fragile as an eggshell. And other people are like, they just write a character and they're like suddenly going upstairs and stuff and they're in a wheelchair. And you're like, this doesn't. So I wanted to make, so I actually got on Reddit has a really good disability sub for people who use wheelchairs and all kinds of stuff. And I got a couple of people from there to sort of talk me through things and bounce stuff off of. And when I did the Final Girl support group trading cards, it was really important to me to do an own voices thing. So all the cards are illustrated by women. Marilyn, it's a Latina artist. Adrienne, it's a BIPOC art, a Black artist. And the woman who did Julia is an artist who uses a wheelchair, because I also knew that there were things she'd get right about drawing a wheelchair and a human body in a wheelchair that like other artists would get wrong or would look stiff. And actually, because isn't it pathetic? I keep my own merch like within arm's length of myself.
Not pathetic at all. I'm
this
curious.
is the Julia card, which I thought she did this amazing job of. And actually, it was very validating for me because when she asked me what kind of wheelchair Julia used, and I told her, and she's like, nice choice. That was actually the first wheelchair I really invested in. I was like, yes, I got it right. So, and then the voices of these women, it's just fun. I mean, like, I know a negative person who's sweet like Marilyn. I know creeps who are sort of like can't stop talking like Heather. I kind of am one. I all these things were you know, they're just fun voices to write. So yeah, so I hope that answered the question. I went a little far afield.
Well, so nice to see. We have viewers from the United States, but also Canada and Australia, and this is really fun. And I apologize to everybody that I am your substitute for Adrienne.
I know, I feel really bad.
Did you happen to see the question?
Not about you.
Thank you. From Stacy Adams. Wondering about how the vengeance / justice oriented slashers fit into the genealogy of slashers you've outlined, i.e. slashers who right wrongs on anniversaries as opposed to the random faceless killers.
Oh, yeah, you know, so for me, so I have a really hard time with slasher motivations. Like, they don't make sense. Like, I'm just gonna say this, and I hope it doesn't offend anyone, but like, the whole Friday the 13th series is about people who blame other people for their problems. Like Pamela Voorhees blames these campers counselors who've never met her son for the death of her son. Like, and so she kills them. And so then Jason pops up to kill people for killing his mom. That makes sense. By Friday the 13th part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, you feel like Jason may have lost the plot a little bit. Like, does he remember his original impetus to do this? He's just lashing out. You know, you look at Halloween, like Michael Myers, what's his issue? He's just gross. Nightmare on Elm Street, like other people, Freddy was a pedophile who got murdered in sort of a vigilante issue. Vigilanteism is bad. At the same time, murdering their kids, like he's just blaming other people for his problems, like being burned to death. The sort of like justice killers I think you're talking about, who are like My Bloody Valentine, I think, and stuff like that. I feel like they're just blaming other people for their problems. None of these kids you're killing have anything to do with the mind, like literally, or your wife having an affair, like literally nothing. Like, and so I don't have a lot of sympathy. The one killer in slasher movies I have a lot of empathy for is deformed mutant sons, like in Funhouse or Hell Night or Humongous, even though Humongous is a terrible movie. And I hate to say that about any movie, but Humongous is not a movie I enjoy. It's very dark, and I mean that in terms of lighting, like I can't tell what's going on in it. But these are deformed mutant sons, and I feel like they just kill teenagers because teenagers all break into their houses and mess up their stuff, and I feel that way about teenagers all the time. And frankly, I often wish the deformed mutant son basket case someone just thrown out. Yes, exactly. I've always wished deformed mutant sons would get together with Sloth from Goonies and, like, you know, Eric Stoltz from Mask, who's not a monster at all, and like just form a club, like a support group, because I feel like the deformed monster sons like Eric Stoltz and Mask will and Sloth and Goonies will help elevate the other ones to a better place.
So I have a question. You know, for your last book, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, you created a podcast titled Super Scary Haunted Homeschool to educate readers and listeners on the history of horror. You know, season 1 was all about vampires. Can we expect a season 2 about horror movies?
Oh man. Okay, so I'll tell you, podcasts are hard. So doing Super Scary Haunted Homeschool, I really had all this information about vampires I was going out there with, and to promote the book, and then there was this pandemic, and so I started using it to do the podcast, which was a hell of a lot of fun. 2 episodes of that podcast, the Dracula Mina Harker one and the World War I episode, are 2 of my favorite things I've ever done creatively, period, full stop. Like if I had 5 creative things, those were all occupy 2 of the spaces. You may listen and differ. I appreciate and respect our differences. But the problem was the research was taking me 6 to 7 weeks for every episode to research it and do all the reading I need to do and write the scripts. And then I was the person doing, you can tell by the terrible sound quality and the bad editing, that's just me doing it all. So that would take me another 3 weeks. And so it's 10 weeks. and you don't get paid for podcasts. I like finished it and I was like, where's the money? I was like hitting refresh. I was like, doesn't money come out of this computer somehow when you do a podcast? And it doesn't. So in case anyone was wondering, the slots, there is no more money. Apple took them out. They're like, no more money slot for podcasts on laptops. If you have a Microsoft laptop, maybe it does. I don't know. But I love doing it, but I need support. So I keep trying to find a partner who will come in and like I'll do all the research because I'm stupid, and I'll write the script and I'll do the voice, but I need someone else to do the sound editing and stuff. And I just haven't found someone as dumb as I am yet, but I love doing those. And I would love to go beyond with vampires, because I've got half of a Hammer episode all ready to rumble, because that's when vampires started getting like really sexy without the venereal diseases. And like, I am so ready to roll on that. Trading cards are all out. Dude, Tom just asked in the chat about trading cards. No, we did a run of 1,400 of them, and I've got 6 packs left, and they're all already, I've got booksellers that they're going to. So I'm so sorry. So
well,
actually, can I say,
like you, yeah, go ahead.
so I was, oh, thank you, Tasha, for saying that the Carmilla recap cheered you up in Super Scary Haunted Homeschool. That was so much fun to do, because it was so great to be like, lesbian vampires, here's that trope. And then put in some sexy Waka Waka synthesizer music on it. So I wanted to, because Adrienne's not here and I feel really bad. And I appreciate you guys putting up with my like manic intensity here. So I want to tell you how I met Adrienne, and sort of a little bit about Adrienne. And I'm just making sure she's not on here and just being quiet and sneaky. Okay, she's not. Adrienne's fine with me sharing this story. I've talked about it a lot with her. But so this is boring, and I apologize. And if you want to like spark a new joint or pour a new drink or just log off, go for it.
It's not boring. It's not boring.
So when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies at all. And we were just from South Carolina. I don't know. So I needed to see R-rated movies because you're a dork if you don't see them. So I would like read like the Marvel comic book adaptation of Alien that Walt Simonson did and pretend I'd seen it, or I'd read the Mad Magazine parody of like Jaws and The Godfather and like pretend I'd seen them. Like these were like, I had to be careful because like they were parodies, so I could get stuff wrong. I had to be super cautious, but I wanted people to think I'd seen these movies like they all seem to have. And so I finally came across this great solution to this problem when I realized that after Cub Scout meetings, our Cub Scout master would take us over to the Oasis gas station in the middle of the highway, which was weird. He took like 14, 11-year-old boys across this like highway to get snacks. And we go in, and I convinced him, I think it was Clyde Dangerfield was the Scoutmaster, that I was allowed to buy magazines with my snack money. And the first magazine, and then he realized what I was doing, and so it became the last magazine I was allowed to buy, was Fangoria. And I bought Fangoria 12 of April 1981. And the cover story was Friday the 13th Part 2, the opener. I'm going to spoil Friday 1 and 2 for you. Sorry, folks. So at the very opening of Friday the 13th Part 2, and it's like a big feature on it. It's Tom Savini special effects. And Fango is like, they won't let them do other stuff about Friday because they didn't want to give away the fact that the final girl from Part 1 dies in the first 10 minutes of Part 2. So it's all in the opening. And it's like page after page of like, they describe the plot and the photos and the captions and all this stuff. And so I'm like, yes, okay. It's like I've seen Friday the 13th Part 2, but just the beginning. I've just got to keep the conversation at the beginning. So the beginning of Friday the 13th Part 2, Alice Hardy, the final girl from Part 1, played by Adrienne King, is hanging out in her crummy apartment in like, I think it's like upstate New York. She's wearing these weird overalls. She's like doing some art therapy. She's trying to get over the events of Part 1 where she like saw all her friends murdered and had to decapitate Miss Voorhees and then was attacked by Jason in the canoe. Very traumatic. And so she's like talking to her mom on the phone, blah, blah, blah. It's a night. And all of a sudden, she opens her fridge. Miss Voorhees' head is in there. Jason pops up and ice picks her on the head and she dies. And I was 8 years old. I'm blown. My mind is blown. I'm like, oh my God. This girl went through all this horrible, horrible stuff in the first movie, and they just knock her off in the second. Like, she seemed like, to me as an 8-year-old, I'm like, she seems to be getting better. She seems to be in a really good place. She's moving forward. She's having a life, you know. Sure, she's drawing a lot of pictures of Jason, but that's just part of her process. And then they just knock her off. And even then, I was like, I wish I could do something, like give her a better ending, because that sucks. Like, maybe she's not dead. Maybe she's just like really hurt. Maybe that ice pick just missed her brain. I don't know. I was 8. And that also got me thinking about characters in movies outside of movies. And before then, I hadn't really thought of that. But now I was like, so she was doing stuff between 1 and 2. She was going to therapy. She was doing all these things. And then later in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, where Heather Langenkamp, who plays Nancy Thompson, the final girl from 1, shows up as leading the therapy session for all the kids in 3. I'm like, oh my God, they help each other. They go between the movies and they help each other. And I was like, that really made an impact on me. So cut to 40 years later, I've written Final Girl Support Group. My friend Ted, who I've done some movies with, knows Adrienne a little bit. He has her email. I get her address. I send her a copy of the book because I want a blurb from her. I'm like, oh, wouldn't that be cool to get Final Girls doing blurbs? And I named the character after her. And so Adrienne calls, and we get on the phone, and she really loves the book. And we start talking. And so she tells me this story. And this story really, so when Adrienne did Friday the 13th Part 1, she had a blast. She was like 20, 21 years old. She loved it. It was a lot of fun, a lot of improvising. It was a great time. So the time comes to do 2. Producers call her up. You want to do 2? Gonna do it. 1 was a big hit. She says, great. She says, I've got this personal problem though. In my life, it's a little tricky, but I think it should be okay. They say, great. They go off, they come back. Weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks later, and they're like, okay, why don't you, here's your start date, all this stuff. So she shows up on set, goes to upstate New York, they put her up in a motel, goes to set, thinking that she's the star of Friday the 13th Part 2, and that this is day 1 of production. They never showed her a script, but the script of Part 1, she said, was just coming in day by day as pages. And she'd done Part 1, they improvised a lot of it. So she's like, no problem, I got this, I'm a pro. She goes on set, they have her improvise the phone call with her mom, walk around, react to some stuff. Oh, you see something really scary. And she doesn't know, because it actually is the last day of production and everyone's been wrapped. And she doesn't know what's going on until a guy wearing some of Jason's costume takes the prop ice pick and sinks it in the side of her head. And you can see it if you watch the movie. Like, Friday movies love gore. They love the corpse shot. There is 1 shot of Adrienne getting that, no gore effect, nothing. And she realizes what's happening. And they wrap, and they put her in a car and send her back to the motel and ditch her. And the personal problem Adrienne was having at the time was she had a stalker. And it was a really bad stalker. It was a guy who would follow her around, and unbeknownst to her, she'd go out to a nightclub with friends and think she was safe because she was with a group. And the next day there'd be Polaroids of her in the club, like on her doorstep in her apartment building. She had a doorman building. This guy was getting in. She'd go out for coffee with a friend. There'd be photographs of her with her friend. She, the guy told her that no one would ever believe her if she talked to anyone. Her manager was like, you can't tell anyone this is going on. No one will hire you. She wound up having to do things like put a deadbolt on the inside of her bathroom door to feel safe enough to take a shower. And here she is going back to this movie that did so much for her. And they just pull the carpet out from under her. And I thought about this, story she told me. And to me, the story isn't what happened there. The story is that she kept going. And she wound up leaving New York, a lot of bad memories, moved out west. She started working again, did a lot of therapy, did stunts in Ghostbusters, and she wound up having a really successful career as a dialogue looper and a voiceover artist. And if you've seen like Philadelphia or Jerry Maguire or Titanic or Mouse Hunt, Adrienne's done voices in that. So you've heard her voice, this sort of like secret final girl hidden down on the soundtrack. And she went on and, really embraced her sort of role in the Friday franchise. She's at this winery now up in Oregon selling the Crystal Lake wines, plug. And I realized that story she told me answered the question I had of what was wrong with me watching these movies. Because I realized that the movies I love, the ones I can't, like, I love the nihilistic ending as much as anyone. I love the door and the drip blood, sure, I'll take it. But the ones I come back to, the ones I love, are the ones with the final girl. The ones with that bit of hope at the end, the ones where these women bust in the room with this big sister energy and they're like, run, we gotta go. And they survive the movies, not because they're smarter than anyone else or stronger than anyone else or have a gun or know how to fight or have some master plan. They survive because they just keep going. And I didn't realize that until I was talking to Adrienne all these years later. She didn't have a hero moment. She just kept going and she survived. And for me, to go from being this 8-year-old kid in a Cub Scout uniform in an Oasis gas station, looking at this 23-year-old woman I'd never met, going, I wish I could write a better ending for her, to Adrienne actually telling me what the ending was 40 years later, I tell you, these questions, they don't mean anything to you guys because they're not on the surface of the book. They're in there just for me. They're what sort of gets me in my desk every day writing. But that, for me, closed this circle. And I am so grateful to her. And I am so grateful to these final girls in these movies because people have gotten in touch with me writing this book to say how much Heather Langenkamp or Marilyn Burns or Adrienne King meant to them in their lives as this woman who just doesn't give up. And so, and I'm sorry to get creepy here at the end and a little intense and emotional, but that to me made this book for me part of my life. For you guys, you read the book, and I'm not, and I love that. That's why I do this. I wish I was in a room with y'all talking to you right now. But for me, it's like years of my life. And to get to that sort of moment with Adrienne meant so much. And to have people like y'all reading it and walking away with something, you're giving back so much more than you know. So I just want to say we're way past 9, but thank all of y'all because you're doing more for me than I could for you.
Well, maybe we can have a sequel where Adrienne will be able to join us. That would be absolutely love because I hate that she wasn't able to be here tonight.
Yeah, me too.
But everybody, order the book, The Final Girl Support Group from Exile and Bookville. Go ahead and download the audios. You can hear Adrienne do the voiceover. She does an amazing job. I was trying to find the clip that I had so I could play it for everybody, but yeah. I failed. I couldn't.
No. You did that. And I forgot to even say Adrienne does the audiobook. Like, I know, sorry, burying the lead.
She does an amazing job. So Javier, take it away.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Grady, and thanks, Beth, for stepping in. We are eternally grateful to you every single week. So thank you so much. I'm sorry it ran over. I'm not finished yet. I have a few things to if you have a minute, Grady, just to talk to you about, because I think we've done one of these before, and I know we're both sort of cut from the same cloth when it comes to horror films. So much so that before you had adjusted your camera and that poster behind you said "train." In my heart, I was hoping it said Terror Train because it was one of the first movies that I had ever seen as a teen. And you talked about Black Christmas. I watched that when I remember as a kid. I'm the last of 7, and my brother watched horror films, and so I went to see. If I'm in California, going to drive-in theaters, we couldn't go with a girl without me. So I watched a movie while my older brother and his date made out in the car. I sat on the hood, which was fine with me. I saw some amazing movies. Oh, but I watched Terror Train. I watched Zombie, the folky the shark the shark fight in the beginning.
Zombie versus shark. Also, it's just amazing to me. You're watching Terror Train. They're making out behind you, and you're watching Jamie Lee Curtis, the dude, make out with a corpse in the beginning of that movie.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, it stuck with me for a while. It turned me into the person I am today. But when you talked about Black Christmas, I had not seen that since, God, when it first came out, and I just rewatched it for the first time since then. Like, it's been what, countless decades. But I forgot that Andrea Martin was in it, who is a comedian. She was on SCTV, one of my favorite sketch shows, and she and the phone calls that they get in the beginning of that movie are absolutely, they're horrible. Like the way he talks to, he says you couldn't do that these days, and it was like, I totally forgot. I maybe like blocked that out because it was really, really horrifying. But I also wanted to congratulate you on not just the book, but also the HBO adaptation of the Final Girl Support Group. I'm so excited to see how that turns out. I know it's going to be fantastic. Sounds like they have a good cast going, and from top to bottom, it's going to be amazing. But yeah, this was such a great event, and it is too bad that Adrienne couldn't be here, but maybe we can do something in the future where we can get her back on. And yeah, that would be fantastic. I'm going to let you guys all go, but
once the sky stops hating Oregon, I think Adrienne will be back in business.
I know, that's so crazy. That's so crazy, all those thunderstorms and lightning storms. But you can get all of Grady's books through Exile and Bookville, but this one especially comes with this. I keep showing the amazing book plate, signed book plate, and we'll be sure to send you. We'll give our own plug. Our very cool bookmarks for Exile and Bookville. Thanks everyone for coming. Buy lots of books, support Grady, and Beth, thank you so much for stepping in. You did us a huge favor tonight.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate you coming out. Let's do it in person before too long.
Oh, that'd be great. And Grady, can you hang around just for a little after everybody signs off?
Yeah.
Thanks. Good night, everyone. Good night, Amanda, if you're still there.